Thank you. The chair now recognizes the congressman from Florida, Mr. Mills.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I want to start out by going to a question that was posed moments ago, Mr. Resnick, with regards to the approval process. As you know, the DDTC has an actual DDTC response that you can track from your submittals on a DSP-83 to a DSP-5. And I can tell you that your comment that it's 48 hours in approval couldn't be further from the truth. I've watched where multiple times the DSP-5 was held up within the DDTC, and in some cases, they are returned without approval or returned without any type of response, negative or positive, without any actual understanding of why, even when the National Security Council and others have approved it. I also noted that you said about wanting to put the blame on industry, but the reality is that when there's no confidence in industry that the approval is going to come out, and knowing the prolonged timeline in which we submit a proposal, which is supposed to get to the LCTA BAFO, this timeline could be a year, 2 years, which is why I've been very much advocating on procurement reform to ensure that we could also expedite these processes. But again, the idea that it would take industry long to purge lines to ensure that the previous contract didn't actually have any overlapping materials to ensure that it was a legitimate new cost doesn't take industry that long, and I've seen where they've done it. They like to try and add that it costs more than it really does, and I know how they fluff the things on this. And they claim that they use GAAP, our generally accepted kind of principles, but we know how that's been abused. But I want to go back to outcome, not process. The OEM for F-16 parts, and we know we just had roughly 103 Chinese aircraft that had basically incurred a little bit of that on-the-line kind of preemptive response that allowed the Taiwanese having to spin up. Every time they cycle that aircraft for the F-16, that leads to a closer point in which they're actually going to say, okay, well, last time that we did this exercise, we saw a 10% increase in how many people responded than now. That must mean that they don't have the necessary parts. So it gives the Chinese also an intelligence capability to gather whether or not we're responding in a timely manner and whether or not that their ability to ramp up to be able to deter this. So again, providing very strategic military information. What can we do to increase the approvals? Not the amount of funding, not whether it's an FMS, FMF, or a DCS contract, which is even better for the United States economy, but to speed up the actual process, because I can tell you, ma'am, it is not 48-hour approvals.
First of all, Mr. Mills, thank you for your leadership on this and for bringing up these very important issues. Highly advanced defense articles, as you know, must go through an interagency clearance process that the Directorate of Defense Trade Controls manages. So that goes through several different stakeholders in the Bureau of Political and Military Affairs. It also goes through other stakeholders within the State Department and within DOD. Within the Pentagon. We are expediting arms sales to Taiwan as quickly as possible. We approve, as I said, we approve most FMS cases to Taiwan within 48 hours. Those are the items that are under congressional threshold. Mm-hmm. Industrial production capacity and not states' review process is what is holding us back at this point. With respect to DDTC timelines, I understand that they may be different than FMS timelines, and you probably know best. But understanding from an outcome perspective, what we are trying to do here is improve those timelines regardless of where the choke points are.
Well, I can tell you that I'm committed to try and work with you, your team, the DDTC, to ensure that we actually do get the necessary reform to support industry and support upcoming response. You know, having run in multiple, defense companies in my past, I can tell you my experience, whether it was with a DSP-5, DSP-83, dealing with ATF Form 2, Form 9s, you name it, we know the overregulations. But I do want to ensure that we're able to respond. And I want to comment on something that some of my colleagues have talked about. They keep talking about how we handle Ukraine determines the outcome of Taiwan, and I slightly disagree with this. And I disagree with this because what we don't recognize is the non-kinetic economic and resource supply chain capabilities that China has really tried to bolster in an effort to try and prevent America from having. The Belt and Road Initiative is a good point where they try to look at Eurasian expansion. They look at the domination of Africa and Oceania to cut off Western Hemisphere supply chain while simultaneously utilizing OPEC, WHO, WF, and others as a way to attack the U.S. dollar as a global currency. And we've seen this. So we're not focusing in enough, in my opinion, on the non-kinetic elements of influence, messaging, as well as for the economic warfare of things. And so it's troubling When Joe Biden at the G20 summit talks about how much he wants China's economy to grow while not giving a whole lot of confidence to our abilities to support developing nations. And my final thing, and I know I'm out of time, Madam Chair, but my final thing is that we kept saying that we don't want to send the message that we're being unreliable. Well, we lost that fight 2 years ago when we walked out of Afghanistan. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman's time